A fragile ego always seems aggressive, confident, expressive, loud, and sensitive, but that's just a shell that it operates from. Deep down and inside, it feels that it is probably wrong. It's scared of making mistakes. It's always fearful of being caught out and being seen through. And this is why it uses all these different mechanisms to stop being or getting caught out or being exposed of this fear. One thing that we've identified is that we have become more comfortable as a species in terms of the way we live, the way we experience life. The more comfortable we have become, the less resilient we have become as well, because never before in history have human beings felt so safer, so richer, more comfortable, more entertained, especially with all the technology around us. And what's that doing is that it's made us emotionally weak. I don't know about you, but I find that people seem to get offended so easily now, even in normal everyday conversations. It seems that in many cases, we are walking around eggshells just to make sure we do not offend or upset the person we are speaking to. And the fact is, we are the most sensitive, most easily offended, most emotionally immature generation in human history. And this is a problem that seems to be getting worse and worse with each new generation. This is not an exaggeration. This is not just me having a whinge and a moan. This is the fact of everyday life now. Because underneath all this mental health crisis, amongst this loneliness epidemic which we've spoken about, beneath the online rage, beneath all this sensitivity, there is a serious core issue. And that core issue is that the human ego has become so fragile. People can no longer tolerate discomfort. They can no longer handle pressure. They break down when challenged. People collapse when being criticized. And they don't like hearing the word no. They don't like being told that they are imperfect in any way whatsoever. And in a world filled with such fragile egos, even ordinary life seems overwhelming. But this is the bit that people do not confront or articulate or say what's on their mind. But the fact is, the fragile ego is not a modern invention. It is the default ego when untrained. The difference is this: past generations trained the ego. This generation avoids training it. That's why we are drowning in the problems of the ego that we are experiencing and witnessing now. What you're about to hear today is not self-help fluff, not some sort of a philosophical reminder, but this is true inner science of the ego, the psychology of the inner self, the operating system of the human heart and mind. And if you understand this properly, you will finally understand what's happening around you, why people break, why relationships collapse, why society is so sensitive, why criticism feels lethal, why people react without thinking, why conflict is everywhere. And it's because of the fragile ego. All of it is because of that fragile ego, which in layman's terms is the untrained ego, the enemy within. So why is it that this generation is more fragile than ever before? Let's dissect this. Let's peel off all the layers and get down to the root cause of the problem. One thing that we've identified is that we have become more comfortable as a species in terms of the way we live, the way we experience life. The more comfortable we have become, the less resilient we have become as well, because never before in history have human beings felt so safer, so richer, more comfortable, more entertained, especially with all the technology around us. And what's that doing is that it's made us emotionally weak, because the comfort softens the inner self. When life becomes too easy, pain feels unbearable. Rejection feels catastrophic, criticism feels violent, disagreement feels threatening. We have people who panic over the minor inconveniences, the most minor inconveniences, simply because they've never developed inner tolerance. It's not their fault, it's the environment that they have been raised in. Comfort breeds fragility, discomfort breeds strength. And we've engineered a world that eliminates discomfort at the cost of inner power in every shape or form. Social media has hardened the ego but weakened the self. This is the paradox. People today have the biggest egos and the weakest inner selves. Social media trains you in comparing yourself to others, become addicted to validation. It sort of creates this performance identity where you put on a mask and show the version of yourself that you want others to see. It's fueled insecurity, vanity, and it craves hunger for attention. This is what fuels the fragile ego. So you scroll through a world where everyone looks perfect, successful, loved, admired, wealthy. They're in their best shape on a holiday, smiling, thriving, and suddenly your own life feels inferior. This creates jealousy. This creates insecurity, self-hatred, resentment, comparison anxiety. But most importantly, it creates chronic emotional fragility because your ego is constantly under attack. So what that does is that it shows you is you've not been trained how to deal with this new modern day phenomena, which is the attack on all your different sensory powers, especially when you have started to feel inadequate and secure. So there's lack of emotional education and training in how to develop that inner strength. We teach kids mathematics, we teach them sciences in schools, we teach them geography and history, but we never ever teach them how to handle criticism, how to deal with loneliness, how to confront insecurity, how to resist impulses, how to calm themselves down when they get angry, and how to control those reactions when the ego is provoked. So this is why we are breeding a whole generation of weak adults. They may have grown up into adults, they may have adult responsibilities and adult freedoms, but they are still very childlike in their emotional development. Yes, that's why when you see, I hate saying this, when you see 40-year-old men playing computer games, I always say they are just kids who have grown up into adult bodies, but mentally they are still kids. This is why people snap so easily, they break down so easily. This is why they overreact, and hence why human conflict begins. People crumble under stress because they can no longer cope, because life is hard for them, because they were never trained for this. This is the hyper individualism that has broken the community strengths. I dealt with this in a previous episode about loneliness, how the ego plays a huge part in making us lonely. So you basically push people away because everything becomes ego-centrified. It's all about me, myself, my space, my privacy. I dealt with this quite extensively in the previous episode about loneliness. So what else this has done is it's created an entitlement mindset, entitlement psychologies. This generation was conditioned with phrases like, you can be anything, you deserve the best, you should never be uncomfortable, everyone must accept you the way you are, everyone must validate you. This has created this psychology of I am owed, people owe me something. When real life refuses to meet that fantasy, then people break down and collapse. They are unable to cope. This entitlement plus fragility is a lethal combination. So these are the 5 faces of this fragile ego. Let's get sort of clinical to the point and hit this where it will really resonate with people. There are 5 different behavioral symptoms of fragile ego, and you will recognize them instantly in people around you or perhaps in yourself. Let's not just whitewash this and think that this is a problem that exists in people around us. Maybe you have these tendencies. It's time to shine that mirror on the inner self to see whether you are also a problem. So, number 1, everything is taken personally. A normal person hears criticism and evaluates it. A fragile ego hears criticism and panics. Why? Why me? Why? Because criticism hits the very insecurity they are hiding. Number 2, emotional overreactions to small things. The fragile ego magnifies small comments into insults, small issues into disasters, and small mistakes into catastrophes. They feel unsafe as they react explosively. And then there's this constant need for validation. All these likes and praise and attention, especially on social media, has created this fragile ego to constantly be pumped up and inflated. And it's like a drug. You crave more and more of this validation. And when that validation stops coming, people are into meltdown. The inner collapse begins. Then you have a victimhood identity. A fragile ego cannot tolerate responsibility. Responsibility feels heavy. Self-reflection feels threatening. It chooses the easy path, like I'm a victim and I don't need to, come out of this mindset. Otherwise, I'll have to take responsibility. And this is a method that people deploy to avoid responsibility and accountability. And people with these fragile egos tend to turn their relationships into very fragile ones as well. The relationships which demand patience, tolerance, humility, compromise, open communication, all these principles are thrown away on the wayside because the fragile ego hates all of those. So it destroys those very relationships which were once a sanctuary for the person as soon as any form of discomfort arises. So to understand this further, let's analyze some real life case studies, perhaps of celebrities who have had an open breakdown or meltdown in public because of their fragile egos. Let's say when a rumor spreads or a comment hurts their pride or some negative tweet goes viral, people with millions in the banks, millions of fans, global fame will end up breaking down because of some horrible tweet that somebody has done against them. And this shows you that no matter how strong you feel outwardly, the inner world is paper thin and is what is really propping them up. If that inner world is weak, based on weak foundations, that person will collapse. And we also have cancel culture. It's not moral policing. It's nothing but it's just mass ego fragility. I mean, there's obviously cases where cancel culture has some sort of a valid reasons for its existence in terms of somebody is genuinely very hateful and vile, whether it's racism or sexism, that type of behavior should not be tolerated. But we find also that people are sometimes cancelled because a certain group with a fragile ego could not accept what they were saying. They cannot tolerate disagreement, and they exercise their authoritarian power to silence that. So when people feel offended by differences of opinion, they seek to silence it. Cancel culture is the manifestation of the fragile ego demanding the world to protect its feelings. So let's look at an example of a relationship collapsing. Most relationships today don't die from cheating, they die from ego fragility. Oh, he did not support me. He did not agree with me. Or she did not agree with me. He pointed out my issues. She didn't make me feel special. Fragile egos cannot tolerate correction. They cannot tolerate discomfort. They cannot tolerate that emotional friction. So it's much easier to walk away from that relationship than to learn and grow within. It's the same also in the workplace. In fact, it's getting worse in the workplace. Ask any employer today and they will tell you that the job is easy, but managing the emotions of the people, the staff, is the hardest part. Today's employees cannot handle feedback, accountability, expectations, deadlines, corrections, any form of criticism. That's why HR departments are always so busy just putting out fires, because they're just managing people's egos, the people who feel attacked, judged, undervalued. This is the fragility which ruins their careers. Let's look at society as a whole in terms of how things like depression have skyrocketed, especially amplified with the use of social media, because when people are constantly exposed to social media and seeing how others are happier and doing better than them, and their fragile ego can no longer take it, it highlights their own inadequacy, insecurity, then they have a meltdown and they fall into depression. And this is again down to our own inner child, the ego, that which the ancient masters have said that if left untrained becomes hypersensitive, impulsive, defensive, insecure, and full of paranoia and always overreacting. They've told us that this ego constantly exaggerates the threats around it. It resists the truth. It hates being corrected. It always blames other people because it's easier to blame others for your own shortcomings. And it sort of masks the insecurity with arrogance and destroys all types of relationships along the way. This sort of fragile ego is like the child within the adult, the untrained, spoiled child who has never been disciplined. So if you don't discipline a child, imagine what he will grow up to be as an adult. So the ego inside is no different to the child which is out of control. It needs to be controlled and tamed. If you don't take control of it, it will take control of you. This is the inner saboteur, which is fragile by nature and by default. It responds emotionally, not rationally. It reacts impulsively and not intelligently. It chooses comfort over courage. This is why ancient wisdom across all cultures emphasize one thing: master your inner self before you master anything else. It's only now, even myself have personally, truly, fully have understood this principle which you have been hearing even from a very young age. Master your inner self, master your inner self, because this generation has not mastered the inner self. It's taken me a long time just to understand this concept, and there's many out there who don't even know about this inner saboteur, how it runs the show, how it ruins the show for you. So let's look at the 7 mechanisms of this ego fragility, that what makes this ego so fragile, so we understand how it operates inside of us and how it can sort of predict. By understanding this, you'll be able to predict your behaviors and perhaps the behaviors of others around you. So, number 1, fragile people do not separate their thoughts from the truth, their feelings from facts, their identity from their opinions. So any challenge to their ideals feels like a challenge to their existence. So, for example, if you say to somebody, your approach needs improvement, a strong person who would hear that would analyze this, that, okay, let me reflect, let me grow from this, I take that on board. Number 2, emotional absolutism. The fragile ego assumes if I feel something, it must be true. I feel angry, someone has wronged me. If I feel insecure, someone must have humiliated me. If I feel jealous, someone is better than me. If I feel rejected, someone has betrayed me. This leads to a distorted inner world, governed entirely by emotion and feelings. And this fragile ego does not verify if this is true or not. It does not evaluate. It does not question itself. It just reacts. And that reaction always produces collateral damage. Number three, it's when the fragile ego magnifies small issues into existential crisis. You send a message and someone doesn't reply for 2 hours. A normal mind says, they must be busy. A fragile ego says, they're ignoring me. I must have upset them. One comment from a colleague, I think we can improve this. A normal mind says, good idea. A fragile ego reacts differently. They must hate me. They've got it in for me. This catastrophic thinking creates unnecessary drama and stress and wears out relationships. Number four, addictive validation. The fragile ego is addicted to being admired, appreciated, validated, noticed. When this validation stops, even briefly, they feel something is missing. Maybe they feel worthless. This is why fragile ego type of people are constantly posting online, oversharing, trying to seek attention. They hint at problems just to get people's sympathy. They create drama when there shouldn't be any drama. They fish for compliments, chase approval, because their inner world is empty, so they depend on others to fill it. Number five, avoidance of responsibility. Responsibility is heavy. It requires growth, accountability. It requires humility. But the fragile ego hates all of the above. And instead of taking responsibility, it blames toxic people, the system. It calls out haters, jealous relatives. It calls out, the problem being out there. Anything but accept themselves. And this is why these type of people are trapped in that emotional immaturity. Number six is about projection, where the fragile ego is projecting its flaws onto other people. If they feel insecure, then everybody around them becomes judgmental. And if they're jealous, they think everybody is a competitor. And if they are dishonest, then everybody else is fake around them. This is not the truth, obviously. It's just what they want to project on others. Number seven is about the avoidance of discomfort. This is a big one because the fragile ego cannot tolerate discomfort. And they immediately run away from it. Discomfort in conversations, discomfort in conflict, even in silence. They don't even like their own company. They need to be constantly surrounded by noise, which is constantly fueling their sort of attention-seeking trait and validation. And they avoid anything which leads to anxiety, loneliness, and any form of emotional vulnerability. So these are all the mechanisms of what identifies that fragile ego. And then you can see how that works out in relationships. Obviously, it's going to be a killer in a marriage or any romantic type of a relationship, where it's going to be a fuel for that relationship to basically break up. What about friendships? So in terms of normal friendships, whether it's work colleagues or just social circles, you will find that the fragile ego even has difficulty in maintaining normal social friendships, because that's one of the reasons why a lot of relationships are very short-lived now. They're not long-term relationships because many adults operate with this sort of fragile ego type of a personality where they get offended very easily. One minor slip or comment, then the friendship is blocked or basically broken, and they cannot tolerate the success of their friends. They become jealous when their friends progress. They start to compete with them secretly. Instead of celebrating their success, they are envious of them. Friends who avoid deep conversations, cannot handle the truth. So the friends who vanish during your success, your achievements, expose their insecurity. Maybe you're one of those people. When your friend becomes successful, you start becoming distant from them because it highlights your own inadequacy. This is why in this modern era, good, sincere, deep friendships are becoming very rare. People are just maintaining very shallow friendships. So it's because of this fragile ego. And once again, what have the ancient masters taught us about this fragile ego? They've said it's nothing but an untrained ego. And this untrained ego is like a wild horse, powerful, stubborn, reactive, and capable of throwing its rider at any moment. And they've even prescribed 3 universal practices to tame this wild horse inside of us, this untrained ego. Radical self honesty, not the modern self esteem type of nonsense like love yourself no matter what. No, trust your feelings. Real inner science begins with examine yourself before you examine others. Why am I reacting this way? Why do I have this insecurity inside of me? Is this really an insult, or did my ego interpret it that way? Am I projecting my own flaws onto other people? Am I exaggerating? What discomfort am I avoiding? This single act destroys 50% of ego fragility. Number 2, embrace discomfort. Ancient teachers have taught us that avoiding discomfort makes the ego weak. Moving through discomfort makes the ego powerful. You are basically training it. This means you will be able to tolerate feedback, sit through awkward moments, learn from criticism, practice silence, hold back your impulsive reaction, apologize when you're wrong, and absorb the truth when it hurts. Discomfort is the gym of the ego. How about serving something higher than your ego? Ancient masters have taught us that this higher self does not need to be a religious sort of objective, but it could be anything that you have, which is such a big, purposeful existence objective that every other insignificant peripheral thing dissolves into nothingness. It no longer becomes a big thing in your life. Be like the eagle when it's soaring high, that mountains look like small pebbles instead of the small ant which makes every little pebble look like a big mountain. This is the mindset that we should have, the mindset of an eagle that soars so high. It has such a high purpose in life that when it's looking down, even big mountains seem like small pebbles. This is the standard that we should be living by. And this is why the whole world needs this inner science now, how to control the ego, because society is collapsing because of this. People are becoming emotional, lonely, jealous, anxious, overly sensitive, reactive, and addicted to all sorts of different behaviors. And most importantly, it's a manifestation of immaturity, emotional immaturity. Let's just analyze some of the root causes of this ego fragility, the disconnected self. And when we analyze this, you will see that most the people who suffer from this syndrome live their lives externally, in terms of always constantly looking for external achievements, validation, relationships, rewards, but inside they feel this constant emptiness, noise, insecurity, thus leading to this fragility. And you cannot live a successful life without understanding your inner world. Your ego becomes the default ruler, and the ego is blind and reactive and defensive, very childlike. That's if you do not master this inner enemy within, which you can look at as an enemy, look at as a child, a wild animal, a wild dog, I call it, out of control, which needs to be trained. And that's the only way you are going to live a successful, emotionally stable, mature life. A human being cannot be stable when their ruler is unstable. This is why people feel lost and overwhelmed. And this is why the inner world is constantly at risk of collapsing. The world is fine, But if the inner world is collapsing, then outwardly that will manifest itself as well. A fragile ego always seems aggressive, confident, expressive, loud, and sensitive, but that's just a shell that it operates from. Deep down and inside, it feels that it is probably wrong. It's scared of making mistakes. It's always fearful of being caught out and being seen through. And this is why it uses all these different mechanisms to stop being or getting caught out or being exposed of this fear that it has. That's why there's another real life example that we can cite in terms of what is projected outwardly and what the reality is from the inside. Look at the life of tyrants, whether in modern day era or any time in history. If you analyze the life of tyrants, how they have a very fragile ego, and look at how they operate. People think tyrants are strong. They are not strong. They are the weakest individuals psychologically because the fragile ego craves power to cover their insecurities. That's why they want to control others, to avoid accountability and to escape its own inadequacy. This is why some leaders collapse into rage when questioned. This is why some influences even lash out at criticism, and some men dominate others when they cannot tolerate their own vulnerability. This is why some women manipulate because they cannot tolerate honesty. Fragility is the root of dominance. Strength, in contrast, is patience, grounded and stable in a strong human character who has controlled their ego. The fragile ego is also tied in very closely with loneliness, which is something which we have spoke at length about in a previous episode. So you can go back to the episode on loneliness to show you how that fuels a person's loneliness because of their fragile ego. I want to leave behind some valuable lessons for you. These are antidotes for a fragile ego. What ancient inner science prescribed in modern psychology is now confirming. If you take these on board, then you will be able to strengthen your fragile ego. Fragile ego is just like a muscle which needs training, and with training and more practice, it's going to become stronger and stronger, and you're going to break that weakness which is constantly riding that sort of software of your life. So number one, radical self-honesty and self-introspection. Stop lying to yourself. Admit these flaws. Admit your insecurities and realize that you have a problem. That's the only way you are going to start addressing it. Then, two, seek discomfort deliberately. Your ego will only grow when it goes through that discomfort and have difficult conversations. What I would even suggest is the people around you who know you the most, this takes a lot of bravery. The people who know you very, very well, interact with you on a daily basis, could be your spouse, your family members, your colleagues at work. Tell them to sit down with you and have a honest, no filters, without any restriction, constructive criticism session where they are able to, without any retribution from you, they can sit down and give you an honest feedback. Maybe you create some sort of a Google form which they can do it anonymously. Maybe some people genuinely will not be able to give you that constructive and honest feedback because they're scared of a backlash from you. And if they're unable to, just you make a link, send it to your closest people, and tell them to ask them a series of questions about your behavior and give them, or they can write anything they want about you as a constructive criticism. And your job is just to listen and take it on board, not even try and justify or defend that action of yours or why you behaved in a certain way on a certain day. Your job is just to listen, and you will find that this can be an immensely powerful technique to help your ego grow. So you really need to develop that strong character to be able to receive this feedback. Otherwise, if you still are unable to accept it, then nobody's going to give you this honest feedback, and you'll just continue to live your life in that delusion that you are probably perfect. Next one is that master your emotional pause. Between emotion and reaction, insert a pause. Take a deep breath, pause. This is how you can regain control rather than constantly just acting on impulse and reacting instantly to something which somebody may have said you don't like, which the fragile ego does, reacts instantly. The strong ego holds back, chooses when to respond. So I've given you 3-4 different points. Maybe this is the fourth one. Stop taking things personally. This single shift will transform your life. Most things people say have nothing to do with you. People speak from their own stress, their fears, frustrations. The other person could have a fragile ego and they're projecting their own flaws onto you. That's why you cannot take things seriously all of the time, and sit back and analyze rather than always constantly trying to process what they are saying. Then also, stop seeking this sort of external validation from others. Your value comes from your own integrity, discipline, character, and purpose. You are not dependent on other people's opinions for your own validation. And finally, I've mentioned this time and time again, serve a higher purpose. And this is how you are going to ultimately cure this fragile ego, because once you build a higher meaning, purpose, your life has direction, you will not notice these small peripheral things around you which are constantly provoking your ego. This is how you are going to rise above all this and exercise the ego to become much, much more stronger. Just a final thought. If you think that you are not one of those people who suffer a fragile ego, then I want you to do a quick test. I'm going to give you a quick series of questions. And if you've answered even or ticked 3 out of 10 of these following statements, then know for a fact that you suffer from a fragile ego. You want to know what those 10 questions are? Write them down or start counting in your head how many of these you agree with. Do you get offended very easily? Does criticism hurt you deeply? Do you avoid difficult conversations? Do you react before thinking? Do you compare yourself to others constantly? Do you feel threatened by other people's success? Do you assume the worst in people? Do you get jealous easily? Do you struggle to apologize? Do you need constant reassurance? If you felt uncomfortable reading this list, that discomfort is also a sign of your fragile ego, and that is your answer. It means that this episode was made for you. And as a final message, what I will say to you is that the world will not get stronger for you at the way things are progressing. You have to keep monitoring yourself and ensure that you can become stronger to deal with the sort of world around you, which is becoming even more fragmented and collapsing under the weight of the fragile ego of other people. So you need to ensure that you become kinder, you become a nicer person. So that way life will become easier. Society will never become easier. Don't wait for other people to change. You need to change. The world must not adjust to your ego. Your ego needs to be stronger to adjust to the changing world out there. Life does not become easier. You just become stronger. This is the mission of this entire podcast series. And I would like to hear your feedback. Comment below. Anything here that you liked, anything further you'd like elaboration on. And also, let's hear from your own world sort of experiences, life experiences. What is it that you have done which has demonstrated a strong ego or a fragile ego? And if there's anything else you want us to cover, let us know in the comments below, and then we will see if we can touch upon that in a future episode.